Jæja, komið þið sæl og blessuð og verið velkomin á þetta fyrsta hádegiserindi af 3 sem Umhverfisstofnun og Reykjavíkurborg bjóðu upp á í tilefni nýtnivikunar. En hún hófst þetta laugardaginn og stendur yfir út þessa viku. Ég heiti Birgitta Steingrímsdóttir og ég starfa sem sérfræðingur á sviði loftslagsmála og græns samfélags hér hjá Umhverfisstofnun. Mig langar að segja ykkur aðeins frá nýtnivikunni, en þetta er sem sagt samevrópskt átak sem hefur það að markmiði að hvetja fólk til að draga úr allri óþarfa neyslu, nýta hluti betur og draga þannig úr myndun úrgangs. Og sveitarfélög, stofnanir, fyrirtæki, skólar, bara hver sem eru hvattir til að setja nýtni og úrgangsmálin svolítið á dagskrá þessa vikuna. Hvort sem það með skipulagningu viðburða, með fræðslu, með því að mæta á viðburði svo þennan eða hvað það er. Og þema nýtnivikunar í ár, það ansi skemmtilegt. Það sem sagt það sem ekki sést eða invisible waste. Og það vísun í að við neytendur, við erum ekki alltaf fyllilega meðvituð allan þann úrgang og mengun sem fylgir framleiðslu þeirra vara sem við kaupum. Og þar af leiðandi erum við ekki alltaf meðvituð þau heildarumhverfisáhrif sem okkar neysla hefur. Svo ég tala nú ekki losun gróðurhúsalofttegunda sem á sér stað við framleiðslu, flutning og jafnvel notkun þeirra vara sem við erum að kaupa. Það að segja kolefnissporið, sem við erum oftar en ekki mjög lítið meðvituð En í tilefni nýtnivikunar erum við að bjóða til þessara þriggja afar áhugaverðu erinda, hádegiserinda, og þau eru svona í anda þessa þema. Í dag ætlum við að fá að heyra allt neysludrifið kolefnisspor Íslendinga. Á morgun fáum við svo að heyra hvað einstaklingar geta gert til þess að draga úr neikvæðum umhverfisáhrifum svona í sínu daglega lífi. Og á föstudag fáum við að heyra umhverfisáhrif gagnavera og netnotkunar. Og ég hvet ykkur bara til þess að fylgjast með nýtnivikunni á Facebook og þar getið þið séð öll þessi erindi og alls konar annan fróðleik. En erindi dagsins fer fram á ensku, þannig ég ætla að skipta yfir í ensku núna. So today, Jukka Heinonen, professor at the University of Iceland, is here to deliver his presentation, Out of Sight, Out of Mind, the Outsourced Global Warming Impact of Iceland. Jukka will talk for about 15 minutes, and then he will answer questions. So I encourage you to send him questions via the chat function here on Teams. Without further ado, Jukka, the screen is yours.
Jukka, I'm sorry. I think you're still muted.
All right. How about now?
Yeah, you're good.
All right. Thank you. I was trying to unmute me when I was sharing, but it was apparently not possible. So could you see my presentation previously? And now I will share it again. So just please confirm that. Are you now seeing my presentation?
Yeah, I think it's loading.
All right. Well, good afternoon. Anyway, everybody, hopefully soon the presentation will show you properly. I'm myself seeing it as it is supposed to be. All right, very good. Thank you. So I will be talking about the global warming impact of the Icelandic society today. I have been a professor at the University of Iceland for 6 years now, and I was doing similar research in Finland earlier, and now I have been doing it in Iceland for some time, quite a while already, actually. And the findings are quite interesting from the perspective of how sort of the local and global views can be different. Yes, so I will have this presentation quite short, and then hopefully we have lively discussion afterwards. Please go ahead and ask whatever questions you may have in mind. I will start from like the general overall view on Iceland, how it is globally and how it is also pretty much among the society. That Iceland is relatively green country. It's held as like globally, whenever I go somewhere and I talk with people, it's held as okay, but yeah, Iceland, that's the country where you have the renewable based energy production system. And I'm like, yeah, of course. yeah, it's pretty good. And whenever you look at like international country competitions or comparisons, and so Iceland is always there on top when it's about sustainability, particularly environmental sustainability. But then at the same time, it's currently the 7th most affluent country in the world, or at least within the top 10, depending on which source you look at. And that means that that the consumption power within the country is huge, and it must go somewhere. And of course, all of you know who live in Iceland that it's very, particularly Reykjavik and the capital region, it's very consumeristic society, very consumption-oriented area, lifestyles, and so. And when we start thinking what is the impact of that consumption, no matter if it is within Iceland or elsewhere, then we see what is the global warming impact of the Icelandic society, not what are the emissions that take place within Iceland. And since we know how we are as people, like put in words here by this nice-looking gentleman, this is what drives the society. This is what has led the affluent countries to where they are. This is what drives the whole capitalistic system, that we want more all the time, that we want more money. When we get more money, we all the time we have something in mind that we want more things, more luxury, more this, more that. And typically we also always make the trade-off so that primarily we want more money, and then we do something to use that money, not the other way around, that we would want more, like, let's say, free time, and be able or be willing to sacrifice some of our monetary affluence for that. And of course, this has consequences. It has global consequences. Climate change is entirely global, not tied to any location. It doesn't matter if the emissions are caused in Iceland or in Australia, the impact is exactly the same. And now that we look at the impact of the Icelandic society from this perspective, we don't see quite the greenest country in the world, but we see one which has a consumption-based carbon footprint right here among the top countries in the world. After USA, Singapore, Luxembourg, widely known high footprint countries, before Australia, another well-recognized high footprint society. And what we see is that we have a footprint level of over 20 tons per capita in comparison to, for example, China, India, in which it's well below 5 tons, even like below 2 tons in India, below 3 tons in China. And at the same time, we are willing to say that, yeah, but it's China, it's India, it's those countries in which the emissions are highest. The US, of course, it's both the consumption and the production. But here we can see that it's not that these countries would produce for themselves, but they are exactly producing for these countries over here. And we happily report that, yeah, we have low emissions, we are making this much progress and so on, when much of this progress is actually just because we are willing to push all our production activities and on all like the resource needs that our society has outside of the country to other countries where the production takes place. When we look at the global spread of this footprint of the Icelandic people, here we see that the darker the color, the more of the footprint is caused in those countries, and the lighter the color, then the less. And we can basically see that it's spread around the whole globe. The US is, of course, an important country where goods are imported, China as well, but then you see African countries here, agricultural goods, the same here, Southern America, and so on. And very few countries are just white or even very light. So basically it means that the Icelandic society is causing emissions across the whole globe. But of course they are not showing very much when we talk about reporting within Iceland or within any single city like Reykjavik or the capital region or so. And also, of course, it's not so like important always who has the highest, who has the next highest or so, but we should also keep in mind that there are some limits that we should not be crossing. And that's the important thing. And when we put here this so-called global fair share, that we could think that that is the current level of emissions that every single human being on the globe, on Earth, would have, so that we would be on sort of the visioned pathway to 2-degree warming, it would be around here. I would say that we have already, the globe has already warmed more than 1 degree, and even the already emissions already in the atmosphere, the concentration already in the atmosphere leads to more than 1.5 degree warming. So we can sort of say that 1.5 degrees we have already lost, but 2 degrees is a possibility in a way, at least in theory. So here would be this kind of global fair share that we could start from and then see what the pathway downwards would be. And we can see that there is somewhat of discrepancy, of course, with all these Western societies, affluent countries. And then the only ones here who are below this level are those countries where the emissions on per capita also are skyrocketing because of the increasing affluence in these countries, partially, of course, because of the outsourced production from these Western societies. But also we know that this global fair share is going down all the time rapidly, because it's a budget. We have certain amount of emissions that we still can cause without exceeding certain warming target. For 1.5 degrees, we are already around there, that the budget is almost zero or even negative already. For 2 degrees, there is some budget left, and here we can see how these pathways, the mitigation pathways, go. So how to read this? These are the global emissions, and if we would have started mitigation around in 2000, it would have been sufficient to just reduce emissions at the rate of about 3% a year, and not even reaching zero necessarily ever. So we didn't start, we can see here what has been the development since then. Up to around 18, the emissions were increasing rapidly, and at that point in the year 18, we were in a situation where mitigation would have needed to be on global scale. All emissions globally would have needed to decrease by a rate of around 10% a year to reach this 2-degree target. But of course, we know that we didn't even then start any like actual global mitigation. Global emissions have been increasing ever since, except for this slight sort of downwards turn because of this COVID situation, which is not likely to last for long. And when it comes to recovering from the COVID situation, then it's very likely that the emissions will be skyrocketing again, because the focus will be everywhere else than mitigation. So here we can see that on the same level than in the year 18, for 10 years more, we would be in a situation requiring 30% annual reduction in the emissions, and very soon afterwards. And of course, if the emissions keep on increasing like this, then the budget will be basically zero, and then 2-degree target will be also lost. So here we can see that not just that the mitigation on global scale would need to be really rapid. The situation where we are currently in these Western societies, affluent societies, when looking at this global impact of theirs, it's relatively far away, I would say, from any sustainable situation. So looking again back to Iceland and Icelandic society, and comparing the capital region to the rest of the country, to see how the situation within the country is, and then to look a little bit deeper into this outsourcing aspect. Here we have the personal consumption component of the footprints, which then explains why they are lower overall than in the previous figure. In this study and in this figure we don't have the governmental component and the capital goods and investments, which are pretty significant in the Icelandic society. But this is the personal consumption. the everyday consumption of each resident in Iceland, and comparison between the capital region, all the other towns outside the capital area, and then other like rural types of communities. So we can see that the emissions are increasing like this, not very steeply, but still we can see that this issue of consumption activities and the most consumeristic lifestyles, then focusing on the capital region, we can see the impact here. And we can see that it's almost in every single impact category, or like this different consumption categories where the emissions are increasing, except for transport, in which we have slight decrease between these towns outside and the capital region, but still, even in transport, the capital region reaches higher level than these other rural types of communities. Services very much higher. Of course, they are pretty high already here in this towns category, and then food also very important contributor. Housing not so much, and here we can see the impact of the almost zero carbon energy production system in Iceland, which of course is an important factor as well, but because all the other categories are causing more than 10 tons, then we can see that it's not enough. Not that it would be bad, but not enough. And here we see what is the footprint as reported by the city, which means that it's almost entirely just transport. And we have a lot of transport outside the capital region done by the residents of the region, which explains this difference. And then here we can basically see the outsourced share, which is almost 75%. And then if it would be adding this governmental component and the capital goods and investments, then it would reach even a higher share. Now, there is pretty recent policy push towards reducing the car dependency, particularly in the capital region. Of course, maybe not so much elsewhere, but it can be seen in the capital region. But then it's not very obvious what it leads to in terms of emissions. It's of course it's good if transport is electrified and if less people possess vehicles, but it's only one piece of the solution. And here you can see what seems to be the result of reducing private car operation and car possession. This is the capital region, and then the young adult segment, 25 to 40 years of age, or who have been found not as eager to get the driver's license whenever they turn 18, not possessing as many vehicles as the older generations. And then when coming from the car-oriented zone in the capital region to the most pedestrian-oriented zone in the central area of Reykjavik, and then public transport sectors in between, then we can see that there is important decline in local transport-related emissions. But then what seems to be replacing those, all that reduction basically, and even more, is emissions from international travel. And this is an issue that has been recognized elsewhere as well. We have been studying it in Finland, and it seems to be quite strong that whenever driving goes down, then flying is replacing that and those emissions. And this is how it functions, and this is something that should be taken into account in Iceland as well, very rapidly in the future, to understand how these different mitigation policies affect, and then what would be the policy combination that leads to an effective outcome. We typically think that when somebody gives up on driving, then the big chunk of emissions is cut away from the footprint of that person. But even in such countries as Iceland and Finland, possessing and operating a private vehicle is expensive, and that money, when saved from not driving, not even possessing the vehicle, they are spent elsewhere. We don't save money to just put it under our mattress or something like that, but we spend it on something else. And it's very likely that at least part of that money is spent on holiday travel, because those people, they cannot travel within the country the same way as those possessing vehicles. They don't even necessarily want to. but still they have the same holidays, for example, same free time typically, and pretty much more money when not needing to put the money on the vehicle. So when it's spent on holiday travel, then it's very much possible that the emissions are even higher than in the original stage. And this rebound effect, this is something that typically is entirely missing from all mitigation policies everywhere, not just in Iceland, it happens globally. Why all this should be important? I have London here, which is a vision of how it could be in 2100 after even just 2 degrees of warming, after 4 degrees even more like Venice type of a setting. Of course, not necessarily this would happen in such affluent cities like London, but you can imagine that Reykjavik is not very much different in terms of the altitude of the central parts of the city. And then, of course, it brings the storms, it brings the hunger throughout the globe, not necessarily in Iceland, but probably not avoided the impacts in Iceland either. It means that 20–30% of the most productive farmlands are lost under the rising ocean levels, and that has impact across the globe. Nobody can avoid that or escape from it. So just as the last motivation why all this would be important. And just very quickly what to do. Plant-based diets, one of the most important and efficient ways to reduce the impact. It's so much land area and so much production that just the livestock needs, and then the conversion rate of energy through the livestock to human is so low, so inefficient that it would be one of the most efficient options to do on personal level. Then of course in Iceland, local production for local consumption, and opting for local produce, and opting for produce that is actually locally produced, and not so that it's imported up to 90% and then something added on top and it becomes a local product. But because of the energy system, this would be, of course, efficient. Reforestation, one of the most efficient ways. It's the only actually important technology that we know for carbon capture and storage. Then carbon storage in the built environment. It's just crazy madness that we are still using the same materials basically as 50 years ago. It's all just steel, cement, asphalt, glass, aluminium, so on. When it could be carbon storage materials, and we could have our built environment instead of a huge source of emissions, a big sink and a big storage of emissions. Regenerative consumption and investments, meaning that we would invest money in these goods that, for example, store carbon, because it would mean that it would be away from other consumption at the same time, and this rebound effect that I was talking about would actually affect the other way around. We would be consuming things that reduce the emissions, and that consumption would further reduce consumption elsewhere. Very effective. And when it comes to such affluent societies as Iceland, focus on well-being instead of economic growth. We would be much more happy, much healthier if we would be working less and satisfying with less consumption. So that was my presentation. Thank you. Now I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Jukka, for a really interesting presentation. We have one question here. The use of services outside the capital area, many services are simply not available. How do you account for this?
Yeah, that's of course, that's a good question, and that's why it shows so that the service block is the highest when it comes to the capital region, and it's pretty high in other towns outside, but it's the lowest in the most rural types of villages because of the availability. But then also it seems that people also travel quite a lot to get certain services, because it's always, no matter if the consumption takes place in Reykjavik, but the person lives in one of these more rural locations, then it's anyway allocated to him or her there. And that's why they also have quite important service-related emissions, even though the services are not available in their own hometowns and villages.
Okay, thank you.
And also when it comes to the Icelandic society, they travel a lot. People go away, go abroad a lot, and buy services elsewhere than in Iceland also.
Exactly. Okay, another one here. Wetland restoration is missing. Probably referring to your what to do then slide.
Yes, that's true. It would be potentially a very efficient option, and yeah, it might be that it's just missing. But I was just thinking of the just like very broad level activities which would be just restoring the built environment restoring the natural environment to sequester carbon, and then making the built environment store carbon. But yes, I could have put it in better words.
Okay. Does it reduce the carbon footprint of traveling to Europe to use Norræna instead of flying the shortest way, like to Glasgow, then taking a train for the rest of the way in both cases? So Norræna is the ship from Seyðisfjörður.
Yeah. Well, this is not a very simple question, because in typical settings, the ferry passenger kilometer based greenhouse gas intensities are around the same as in flying, and then it comes to kilometers. But still, it would not change it entirely. It would be probably somewhat a better option, but not very much better than just flying the shortest route and then continuing with the train.
Okay. Yeah, there's just a comment here, more important here than forestry, probably referring to the wetland restoration. Then another question. Thank you for a great talk, Jukka. What building materials or methods would be the best in terms of lowering the carbon footprint? Are they suitable for Arctic conditions and earthquake or natural disaster requirements?
Yes, they are actually very much suitable, because the best one would be wood. And historically, it's the material that we have been using. It's just the material that we have sort of forgotten about in recent years when it came to technological advancements with these unnatural materials. So wood would be very good material in all of these aspects, and it would be a very good carbon storage in the built environment. Then we have some sort of more advanced technological carbon storage materials, such as hemp line, for example, replacing concrete. But with that, I think that there is not yet much evidence about, for example, the durability in terms of earthquakes. But yeah, we do have options, and wood would be a very good substitute, and could be also arranged in many ways in a very carbon profitable way, so that we would be sequestering carbon and then storing it and sequestering more and storing more and so on, which would create this kind of a positive cycle.
Okay. The next one is, when our consumption-driven carbon footprint puts Iceland in 4th place globally, is it possible to see how it is divided? Like what we as a nation are most responsible for? Is it production, logistics, mining, agriculture, etc.?
Yes, of course, we could derive those as well, but we have never looked into the sort of next level or further from the final production sectors. We have published those numbers for the final production sectors, and I was already showing some for this comparison between the capital region and the rest. But then how we have these primary production sectors, for example, and what is their contribution and in which locations they actually are, that we have never actually looked into. It's a good question that we could do at some point. We have only focused on what are the final production sectors that Icelandic society is using.
Okay, new research topic for you, Jukka.
Yes.
Okay, what needs to change for us to be able to live in a society and economy that doesn't have or need economic growth?
Yeah, now we come to a very deep and broad question, but overall, like from the perspective of well-being of the society, then there would not need to be economic growth in the same way as we currently aim for it. It doesn't necessarily need to be degrowth either, but growth should not be tied to the material throughput of the economy as it currently is. And then if growth would happen because of increased or elevated consumption of local services, for example, that would not be bad type of growth. But this kind of material throughput type economic growth is just probably impossible to connect with sustainably functioning society in terms of environmental sustainability.
Okay, thank you. How can we deal with the outsourced consumption, the countries in which our goods are produced in?
Well, on national level, there are initiatives in which there would be, for example, carbon trade type of mechanisms that would allow carbon reductions to show in the national accounting of those who are only responsible for the consumption of those goods, or they're responsible for the consumption. But that's the problem issue, and that's why we are always focusing on this production perspective, because that's what we can control more directly. But then when it comes to different levels, like maybe not thinking about the national responsibilities from the perspective of national reporting and Kyoto Protocol, Paris Agreement, and so on, then of course these changes in the consumption habits and directing consumption to different consumption categories, different types of goods and particularly services, and then also thinking from the national perspective, thinking about this aspect of reducing out losing well-being. That would be possible in many ways, because there is so much affluence in the society and so much opportunities to increase the well-being of the society with only losing material consumption or reducing material consumption.
Okay, back to service. How do you calculate the use or consumption of service in rural areas with no access to credit cards?
Well, this study of ours, it relies on the consumption survey of the Statistics Iceland, and they collect information based on diaries and interviews. So it's not based on credit card data, but asking people what they consume and how much, and it has this very widely used structure of asking like on a weekly basis when people still remember what they have done. Also.
All right. We have 3 more questions. What are the possibilities in the construction industry in a timber-free country?
Well, reforestation is, I think, one of the, anyway, widely debated issue and ongoing, and we have more efficient options for reforestation as well. But because almost all construction materials are anyway imported, there's no problem in importing timber. Okay. And it might even be efficient to import from just factories producing these prefabricated elements, for example.
Can you build high-rise buildings from wood?
Yes, simply.
All right.
Much higher than what currently exists in Iceland. No problem.
And then the final question, on implementing a low carbon footprint society, would the public need to choose to change, or do we need government policies that put a monetary price on negative environmental impact?
we do need policies. I don't believe in broad-scale, deep change in the society without either governmental push or circumstances changing so that it becomes just evident that it's the only option and it's like the only way. But typically that also is then related to fiscal incentives, for example. So like, for example, de-incentivizing meat consumption, incentivizing much more public transport, utilization, active travel modes, so on. Of course, the capital region has now chosen this pathway of pushing the society for less car dependency, but the means could be much stronger still.
Thank you. Okay, that's it, Jukka. Thank you so much for being with us here today. We will post the video of this presentation on our website, samangegnsóun.is, and I encourage you to follow us on Facebook and Instagram, and also to follow Nýtnivegan on Facebook. But we will see you again tomorrow for the next presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much on my behalf.
Bye.
Bye.